Hi class, in this video I am going to go over the instructions for the border brochure, and I am also going to guide you through the brochure module, which basically consists of resources that will help you with the design of your brochure. The instructions are fairly short because this is a very straightforward assignment. Basically, what you are asked to do is to create a tourism brochure for El Paso, Texas. So the purpose of the brochure is to encourage people to visit El Paso, Texas, or to learn more about El Paso. So you can go ahead and look at it from that perspective, that the purpose is either for people to come and visit or to just learn more about El Paso and what it has to offer. Now, I do know that, for some people, they might think, well, I'm not really sure what it has to offer because obviously it's not a huge tourism hub where we have a lot of tourists coming in every single year. And I also know that there's a lot of issues that plague the border. They've been plaguing the border for years. There's also a lot of negative connotations that surround the border. But as someone who was born and raised here on the border, I am very proud to be from the border, and I also have a deep appreciation for the border culture. So basically, the purpose of this assignment is to highlight the positive things that exist in the US-Mexico border. Now, obviously, we are focusing only in the El Paso region because we're focusing only on the El Paso region because that's the area that we are most familiar with. Specifically, you are going to focus on these 5 categories, which means that your brochure should have these 5 categories, and you want to go ahead and conduct some research to become more familiar with each one of these areas. For example, we have gone over history of the US-Mexico border, and we are going to discuss art and music, and we're also going to talk about environment, nature, and wildlife. But like I said, the brochure should be specific to El Paso, so you want to make sure that you conduct research that pertains to the local area. And also, you want to go ahead and conduct research so that you can go ahead and provide more detailed information. Because we have covered the history of the US border, but again, we covered it in terms of the entire US-Mexico border. And for this assignment, you want to focus more on the history of El Paso, Texas. So for this section, you could go ahead and include when El Paso was established, some of its history, like going back to it being part of the Wild West, the railroads, up until now. So it's up to you what you think are the highlights of the history of El Paso. And then also when it comes to attractions, again, we do have several attractions here that do draw people in, like we have the Misiones in Socorro, we have McGoffin Home, we have the Museum of Art, we have the Museum of History. So you get to decide which ones you want to highlight in your brochure. When it comes to art, we do have several places that showcase murals, but we also have several venues that showcase more amateur art. So again, you get to decide what type of art you want to highlight. And like I said, this does require that you do some research in terms of what's going on. And I realize that, like I said, El Paso is not a major city in terms of art or music. So I would say that your best resources to use would be local newspapers, local social media sites, local venues, local publications is basically what you want to look for when it comes to like the art and music scene. As far as the environment, nature, and wildlife, we are going to discuss how the border wall affects the environment of the border, but you are going to have to do a little bit more research to highlight, the wildlife or the environment in El Paso. For example, we have the Franklin Mountains. We also have a lot of desert areas. We have a lot of outdoor places here in the area that people can go to. And I do want to say that for the most part, you do want to focus on El Paso, Texas, not necessarily like the surrounding areas. It's okay if you mention, like, for example, going to cruises or something like that. But for the most part, the focus should be on El Paso, Texas and its relationship with the border. And that also means, that you don't focus too much on attractions in Juarez or attractions in Las Cruces. like I said, it's okay to mention that it's a short drive to Juarez or a short drive to Las Cruces, but just keep in mind that the emphasis is El Paso, Texas, not the surrounding cities. Of course, that's a perk that people here can drive to New Mexico and they can drive to Mexico fairly quickly, but again, that's a perk. It shouldn't be the basis of your brochure. I hope that makes sense. So whenever you've done research for these 5 areas, you want to make sure that you cite them, and typically the sources should be cited in the back flap of your brochure. Obviously, I am only requiring 3 outside sources, but you can go ahead and have more because we do have 5 categories, so at least use 3 sources, but you might end up using more because it is 5 categories. You can use Microsoft Publisher or Microsoft Word to create the brochure. However, if you are familiar with some other type of software, you can go ahead and use it. Just make sure that you save it as a PDF file because obviously Canvas does not take all these different types of files. It usually only takes like PDF, docx, doc, and it does take Publisher. But I do have to say that sometimes with Publisher, when it's submitted, things move around. So I would say the best bet so that your brochure and the pictures don't move around is to save it as a PDF file. Okay, so let's go ahead and go over the brochure module. These right here are basically the student learning outcomes for the course, and it basically tells you which essential learning skills are met by this assignment. So you can go ahead and read that as well. And I do have a brochure rubric, so you can go ahead and look at that as well so that you know what your grade is going to be based on. This is worth 100 points. So let's go ahead and look at the brochure module. The brochure module is taken from my English 2210 class, which is a technical communication course, and that course focuses more on design. So I brought some of those resources to show you how to design your brochure. So the first one is actually called brochure assignment, but as you can see, it is a handout that tells you what each flap should have in your brochure. So for example, the back flap right here, this is the back flap. Well, this is the middle flap, which is technically in the back. And right here in this flap is where you want to put your reference page, right? But this is more helpful if you were to print it out and fold it, because you can definitely go ahead and see how the brochure is organized. But in any case, it tells you what the brochure should have in terms of each flap. So definitely make sure that you read this handout. And basically the main thing to remember is that the front of the brochure usually has like a picture, and that draws attention. And then whenever they open the brochure, you want to go ahead and make sure that the design is appealing, and you want to obviously start off with the most important information, or the thing or the information that you feel that people would find the most interesting. So in this case, I think something like the history of El Paso would be towards the beginning, because people want to learn about the city first, and then you can go ahead and include the other areas depending on what you feel is the most important. But also keep in mind that brochures have short and straight to the point writing, so you don't want to have really long sentences, nor do you want to have very wordy sentences or writing. It should be very short and to the point, yet it should provide enough information. Because if we think about the brochure is just sort of like a brief introduction to get people to go to a website, or to get people to go to a clinic, or to get people to visit a certain place. So the brochure is not going to be like a book. The brochure is just going to include the most important information that will draw people in. And that's what you need to keep in mind. And also make sure that you include visuals to enhance your brochure. Now, obviously, you don't want to go ahead and include pictures that are not relevant. So the pictures you include, the visuals you include in your brochure should be relevant to what you are writing about. So like, let's say this brochure right here, this section is titled art. You could put a picture of a mural here. Or let's say this one right here is titled environment. You could put a picture of a yucca plant or something like that. Please keep in mind that this brochure is from another class, so disregard what it says right here about topics. Some of the information is very course specific, so just go ahead and disregard that, but definitely pay attention to the design tips that it gives you. Just like right here, it also tells you like the purpose of the top page and things like that. So like I said, disregard the information that does not pertain to this assignment, but focus on the information about each section. So whenever I say section, I am referring to each flap. So this is one flap, second flap, third flap, and then we have 3 more flaps. And again, you should have 5 sections. So one section is sort of like the front is where you put like your title and a picture, and then the other 5 sections will go inside the brochure. Next in the module, we have some tips for writing a brochure, so definitely make sure that you read these. A lot of the tips are based on audience, right? So you want to make sure that you know who your audience is. You also want to make sure that the information is easy to read. And I'm not just referring to it being short and direct language. I am also saying that the design has to work. So for example, if you're going to highlight some points, you can go ahead and put them in bullet point form. Or if you're going to cover some points that need to be in order, you can go ahead and number them. So definitely think about how can I make this appealing to my reader, but also how can I make it easy for them to read so that they can understand it. Because like I mentioned before, the brochure is quick. The brochure is something that people can read in one sitting. It's not something that should take them an hour to read. So whenever you're designing your brochure, keep that in mind, that it should provide good information in a short amount of time that people can read in one sitting. So obviously, a lot of it has to do with your writing, that you keep it simple and short, but you also want to make sure that your design is effective. So sometimes instead of writing paragraphs, you might want to do bullet points. Sometimes instead of writing very long sentences, you want to write short sentences. So all of these are things to keep in mind. And then we have another handout which provides a sample brochure. And as you can see, this one is about a major, but it was created by a student, and you can kind of get the gist of it, how they incorporated visuals, and they also went ahead and provided headers and then the content. And you can also see how they're using color. Something very important to keep in mind when it comes to color is obviously you don't want to use colors that clash. So you want to use a color scheme that goes well with the topic. For example, if you use a rainbow scheme, a rainbow color scheme, that wouldn't necessarily work because that might look too childish. And obviously our audience are not children. Our audience are the general public who can travel and visit certain places. But if you look here, the color scheme is white, lime green, and gray. And then also keep in mind how everything is legible. So you don't want to use colors or fonts that are hard to read, because I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people that I have bad eyesight. So when the wording is when the font is weird, or when they use like an orange color or yellow font color, it just really hurts my eyes. So you want to make sure that you look at it and you say to yourself, can people read this? Will it hurt people's eyes? Because you don't want the brochure to hurt someone's eyes. And also another thing to keep in mind is that you're not going to print this, you're going to submit it online. So whenever you're preparing a document, it's important to think, okay, am I going to print this in color? In this case, we're not printing it out, so it's not going to be folded. So you want to make sure that whenever I read this, I am going to read it in the proper order, right? So for example, it's fine that the front flap is over here, but you could also have included it over here. However, it wouldn't be appropriate to include the title and the front flap over here, because I should not be seeing that in the second page, nor should I be seeing it in the middle page. So for example, this front flap with the title can be here or it can be here. Now, typically, if you were going to fold this, and if you were going to print it out and fold this, it would be on this side. But because we're not printing it out, it can be either here or here. It cannot be on the second page. So just keep in mind that I'm going to read it online and it's not going to be printed out. So make sure that your brochure is formatted accordingly to be read online. And then we also have some designing mistakes that a lot of people make, and these are really good tips, so I really encourage you to look at them. Like, for example, trying to include too much. Sometimes there's so many things you want to include, but remember, you have to only highlight the things that you feel are the most important and the ones that you feel will actually attract people to come to El Paso. So that's your purpose. It's a tourism brochure, and the purpose is to get people to come and visit or to learn about El Paso. So you want to make sure you only include the information that you feel would be the most persuasive in getting people here. And of course, using too many different fonts, you want to be consistent with your design, with your color scheme, and with your fonts, and with your headings. Also, you don't want to use up too much space, like you don't want to fill up every single space, but you also don't want to leave too much white space. With design, it's all about a balance. So you want to make sure that you keep that in mind. And like I said, you don't want to use every single color in the color wheel either. You want to be consistent and you want to create a color scheme that works for the purpose of the brochure. This one's also very important. You want to make sure that you use good quality images that you can go ahead and use from Google, that they're not like copyrighted or anything like that. And you should cite your images if possible. However, I know that sometimes it's hard to cite them because we don't know where they came from, but use good quality images. Don't use poor quality images. And the next one also highlights a lot of brochure design mistakes. Again, go ahead and read these. They're kind of the same that we've talked about before in the previous handout, but they're also very, very important, and they contain new information like missing headings. This is the next page, but going back to the missing headings part, missing headings is something that you definitely don't want to do, because headings are basically what are going to organize your brochure. So if you want to keep your brochure organized, you want to make sure that you have effective headings, and each flap in the brochure should have a heading. So for example, your headings can be history, art, music, or you can go ahead and enhance them a little bit. Like for example, you can title one heading the history of El Paso, or you can come up with a more appealing heading that lets us know that it's going to be about history, or you can come up with another heading that lets us know it's going to be about art. So really, it's up to you, but you definitely want to make sure that you have headings for each section, for each flap of the brochure, because that will help to keep it organized. Now we can move on to the last page. So basically, the last page has links to files that you can go ahead and look over. For example, the first one, the importance of visual aid. That's a PowerPoint presentation that talks about visual aids and graphics and things to keep in mind whenever you are using them in your brochure or document. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I hope that this video was a little bit helpful in helping you get started with brochure design. And if you have any questions regarding the assignment, please let me know.